The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the glass-encased executive floor of Caldwell and Royce Capital. The city stretched beneath it like a glittering promise, its skyline reflecting off every polished surface. It was the kind of floor where voices stayed low and shoes never scuffed. Power here was silent, pressed, tailored, and always watching. Imani Fields stepped out with a quiet breath. Her heels made barely a sound on the marble, yet her presence felt louder than anyone wanted it to be. She walked with calm purpose, a slim leather folder clutched to her chest. Her badge still read paralegal intern, though she had already outlasted 3 rotations and rewritten enough memos to fill a textbook. She paused by the mirrored wall near the boardroom and adjusted her jacket. The reflection showed a young black woman with determined eyes and lips pressed shut. Not from fear, but from habit. She had learned early on that in rooms like these, words were currency, and hers were still considered foreign tender. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric with victory. Nathaniel Brooks, the firm's legendary CEO, stood at the head of the long glass table, surrounded by senior executives. Laughter bounced between the floor-to-ceiling windows. Champagne flutes stood ready on a silver tray, the bubbles waiting to celebrate a billion-dollar acquisition that had been years in the making. Imani took her seat at the far end, near the potted plant and far from the center of power. No one greeted her. She was not on the guest list of attention. Her role was clear. Observe, make notes, and stay invisible. As the meeting began, she opened her folder and began scanning the final version of the acquisition contract. The document was thick, but she had read thicker. As her eyes danced over the clauses, she started to notice something. A phrase, a sequence. It looked wrong. She didn't lift her head. Not yet. At the front of the room, Thomas Greer, vice president of legal, was already half standing with a pen in his hand, giving one last perfunctory nod before the final signature. Celeste Monroe, the poised and merciless director of finance, leaned back in her chair, sipping espresso like it was her signature drink at closing. They were already celebrating. This was supposed to be a formality, but Imani's fingers twitched. Her gaze narrowed. Something about that clause. Her heartbeat quickened. She knew contracts. She had studied them harder than anyone she knew. She traced the line again, this time slower. Her breath caught. The trap was right there, buried in clean legal language. And no one else had seen it. Not yet. The boardroom swelled with backpats and whispered congratulations. Documents passed from hand to hand like sacred scripts, and every signature felt like a stamp of immortality for the legacy makers seated around the table. Imani sat still at the far edge, her pen resting on the margin of her notebook. Her eyes stayed on the clause. She looked again. There it was, ambiguous wording hidden beneath a dense layer of legal jargon. On the surface, it appeared routine, boilerplate indemnification language. But the way it was framed shifted the liability entirely onto the buyer. Caldwell and Royce would be absorbing full legal responsibility for any undisclosed third-party claims tied to the acquired company. No cap. No timeline. It wasn't just a bad clause, it was a ticking bomb. Imani's fingers flexed over the page. She turned it back and forth, double-checking, triple-checking. There had to be something she missed. But it was clear. So clear. This wasn't a typo or a small oversight. It was a trap laid with intention. And it was about to be signed into reality. Looking a little too serious over there. Fields? Someone said lightly near her. One of the junior associates, probably. They didn't expect a reply. She gave none. The executives continued their discussion, praising the due diligence, the efficiency, the elegance of the strategy. Celeste Monroe leaned forward, tapping the folder with a manicured nail. This, she said, is the cleanest acquisition we've ever executed. No snags, no gaps, no risks. Imani looked up, but no one noticed. She was in the room but not in the frame. Her seat didn't come with a voice. That was the silent agreement. But the clause itched at her like static behind her eyes. Her gaze flicked to Thomas Greer, the man who had built the legal division from the ground up. He was scanning the executive summary, not the details. He trusted his team. Maybe too much. Or maybe he didn't care. After all, plausible deniability was its own shield. Imani flipped the page again. No indemnity limits. No termination clause. Just open-ended responsibility cloaked in precision. She felt her pulse at her throat. If this contract went through as it stood, the company would be liable for millions, maybe more, if any skeletons in the acquired firm's closet came to light. Lawsuits, fines, even regulatory investigations could unravel everything. And yet, she sat still, silent, because what was she supposed to do? She was a paralegal, not a partner. An intern, technically. The kind brought in to satisfy a quota. She'd heard the whispers. Smart kid. Sharp. But you know how that goes. They praised her to her face and erased her when she left the room. But now she had seen something no one else had. And if she said nothing, she'd be complicit. If she spoke up, she'd be called disruptive. Or worse, ungrateful. Still, she leaned forward just slightly. Her pen hovered over the page. She circled the clause. The pen left a thin black loop around the trap. In that moment, Imani knew something was coming. And it would not be quiet. The room felt like a theater in its final act. Anticipation humming beneath polished surfaces and expensive suits. Nathaniel Brooks, CEO of Caldwell and Royce Capital, stood at the head of the long mahogany table. His hand hovered above the contract, Mont-Blanc pen poised, a half-smile forming beneath his graying beard. Photographers were already waiting outside. Champagne chilled in the executive lounge. It was supposed to be a perfect ending. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice cut through the quiet like a chisel through stone. "Excuse me," Imani said, barely above a whisper at first. Nobody turned. She cleared her throat and said it again, louder. "Excuse me, but this clause is a trap." Time didn't stop, but it twisted. Nathaniel's pen froze in midair. The rustle of paper halted. Eyes, 20 of them, turned to the young black woman seated where no one had been looking all morning. Imani felt her throat tighten, but she didn't flinch. She pushed her notebook forward, revealing the circled clause. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry. Who?" Before he could finish, Thomas Greer leaned forward. "She's with legal support," he muttered, his voice tight. "Intern rotation. Summer program." A beat of silence followed. "Is there a problem with the clause, Ms.?" Nathaniel asked. "Fields," she replied. "Imani Fields." Nathaniel gestured. "Well, Ms. Fields, you've paused a billion-dollar acquisition. I suggest you explain." Murmurs rose. A few chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a joke or an embarrassing interruption. Celeste Monroe crossed her arms, visibly irritated. The younger associates blinked, unsure whether to look away or lean in. Imani took a breath. "This indemnification clause," she said, tapping the page gently, "assigns full legal liability to the buyer. It doesn't specify a time limit or damages cap. That means if any legal issue arises now or 5 years from now, we're on the hook. No questions. No ceiling." Greer scoffed. "That's boilerplate." "No," Imani said, eyes locked on him. "It looks like boilerplate, but it's deliberately drafted to appear harmless while shifting the entire risk burden. The clause doesn't mirror industry standards. It manipulates them." The air thickened. Celeste leaned forward. "Are you seriously suggesting our legal team missed that? That you, a paralegal, caught something seasoned attorneys and contract specialists did not?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Imani replied. "I'm stating what's on the page." The temperature dropped a few degrees. Greer's mouth opened, then shut. His brow furrowed. He flipped through the packet with sudden urgency, eyes darting to the lines she'd marked. He blinked. Once. Twice. He found it. Nathaniel didn't move. His pen now rested silently on the contract. "Do you have a copy of the original indemnification clause from our last acquisition?" Imani asked, her voice steady. "Compare the structure. You'll see the difference." A few junior lawyers scrambled to pull up digital files. Their screens glowed. Fingers clicked. The room, once alive with ego and certainty, now thrummed with something colder. Doubt. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. Not to the men at the center of the table, but to the quiet woman at its edge. The conference room, once a bastion of confidence and control, now felt like a crime scene. All eyes remained fixed on the contract lying flat on the polished table, its sleek font and gleaming paper now tainted with suspicion. Imani stood slowly, uninvited but no longer ignorable. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't rise. She simply spoke, letting the weight of truth carry her words. "The wording here," she said, pointing to the paragraph that had detonated the mood, "is intentionally ambiguous. It lacks limitation of liability, omits jurisdictional protections, and doesn't carve out exceptions for pre-existing claims. That's not oversight. That's engineering." Thomas Greer shifted uncomfortably. His jaw tightened, as if holding back an outburst. A senior counsel across the table glanced at him, then back at Imani. "If this is signed as is," she continued, "and if the seller's previous legal entanglements resurface, which their history suggests they will, we're liable. Not shared. Not negotiated. Solely liable." A cold sweat began forming behind the expensive cologne and tailored suits. Celeste Monroe leaned in. "You're telling me the clause hands over all risk, in perpetuity, and no one saw it?" Imani nodded. "No one except the person who drafted it. And now me." Across the room, an associate projected the previous acquisition agreement onto the main screen. Side by side, the differences became stark. One clause, surgically designed to appear familiar, was now exposed for what it truly was, a ticking bomb buried under legal decorum. Murmurs turned into hushed debates. Some executives looked pale. Others looked angry. Greer was reading the screen again, but this time slower, more carefully. Nathaniel Brooks hadn't moved. He stood still, arms folded now, eyes on the clause, then on Imani. "You're saying this was intentional," he said quietly. "I'm saying it's too clever to be accidental," Imani replied. "And if it's in here, there may be more." The words dropped like a gavel. An attorney from the M&A team, quiet until now, raised her voice. "I'm seeing similar phrasing in two adjacent clauses, non-compete and third-party litigation. This language isn't just risky, it's predatory." The silence that followed was not of confusion but dawning horror. Celeste stood and paced. "If this leaks, we're the firm that didn't read its own billion-dollar contract." Greer looked up from his screen. "Pull up every clause," she marked. "Now." Screens flashed. Laptops opened. Pages turned. The room transformed into a war room. And at the center of it, the paralegal they had ignored was now the only person who truly understood the battlefield. The room crackled with tension. Thomas Greer, Vice President of Legal Affairs, stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. His face was flushed with irritation. "You don't get to come in here and accuse us of sabotage, Miss Fields," he said sharply, voice echoing off the glass walls. "You're a paralegal. You're not authorized to question the terms negotiated by our top legal team." Imani met his gaze calmly. "With all due respect, Mr. Greer, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm pointing out a fact. This clause could destroy us. Ignoring it won't make it disappear." Celeste Monroe, the head of finance, scoffed from her seat. "You're just a diversity hire who happened to stumble onto a mistake. Let's not pretend you're some legal prodigy." The sting of those words might have crushed someone else, but not Imani. Her voice remained steady, precise. "I'm not here because of diversity quotas. I'm here because I found a real problem. My analysis is based on legal precedent, contract law, and risk management, not my skin color." Greer crossed his arms but couldn't hide the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Even if what you say is true, bringing this up now jeopardizes a deal that's been months in the making. Are you ready to face the consequences if this falls apart?" "Better to face consequences than a lawsuit that ruins us," Imani said. The room grew quiet again. Junior associates began murmuring among themselves, discreetly pulling out their own documents to check the clause. One by one, heads nodded in acknowledgement. The tide was turning. Celeste's smirk faded. Greer's scowl deepened. Nathaniel Brooks, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Enough," he said firmly. "We will review these concerns immediately. Ms. Fields, your findings will be taken seriously." The storm hadn't passed, but a new force had emerged. Imani's voice had become the catalyst, and the power dynamics in the room were shifting. A tense silence settled over the room. The junior lawyers and analysts quickly flipped through their copies of the contract, their fingers tracing the fine print. Whispered conversations broke out as they compared notes. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. The clause Imani had flagged was indeed problematic. Thomas Greer's posture stiffened, his confident mask faltering for a moment. He shot a sharp glance at Celeste Monroe, whose usual smug expression had vanished, replaced by uneasy frowns. The room felt different now, heavier with doubt, uncertainty creeping into the previously assured atmosphere. For the first time that day, power felt less absolute. Nathaniel Brooks leaned forward, his eyes locked on Imani. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of surprise, calculation, and something else, respect. "Ms. Fields," he said slowly, "thank you for bringing this to our attention. It appears you have saved us from a potentially catastrophic error." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The executives exchanged uneasy looks, realizing that the invisible young paralegal had just altered the course of a multi-billion-dollar deal. The moment was charged, but it wasn't yet victory. There was still resistance, hidden agendas and bruised egos to navigate. But Imani could feel the tide turning. Her careful research and sharp instincts had cracked the facade of infallibility that had shielded the firm's leadership for too long. And now everyone was watching her. The room remained thick with tension as Nathaniel Brooks set his pen down decisively. "Pause the signing," he announced firmly, his voice slicing through the murmurs. "We need to reassess the terms before moving forward." Instantly, a ripple of unrest spread among the executives. Some exchanged worried glances, others muttered complaints about delays and lost opportunities. But no one dared challenge the CEO's decision. Not today. Thomas Greer's face flushed red with frustration. "This is reckless," he snapped. "We've run due diligence for weeks. Halting the deal over a single clause is absurd." Celeste Monroe scoffed, folding her arms. "It's just a distraction. Imani's concerns are based on fear, not fact. We can revise the language quietly later." Imani remained calm, her eyes steady on both of them. "The clause is neither vague nor minor," she said evenly. "If signed as is, it shifts the entire liability to us. We risk lawsuits, massive financial losses, and irreversible damage to our reputation." Nathaniel's gaze swept the room again. "Risk is something we manage, but ignorance of such a critical issue would be catastrophic. I want a full legal audit on this clause immediately. No shortcuts." His words hung in the air, unyielding. Behind the scenes, whispers grew louder. This was more than just contract language. It was about who held real power in the room. For years, Imani had been dismissed as an outsider, a diversity hire without a voice. But now, her knowledge challenged the entire leadership's authority. As the executives reluctantly agreed to delay the signing, Imani felt a complex swirl inside her. Relief, vindication, but also the weight of the battles still to come. She knew this was only the beginning. In the crowded elevator descending from the top floor, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. The woman staring back looked different. Not invisible anymore, but seen. And not just seen, but recognized. Nathaniel's decision to rewrite the course of the deal wasn't just about the contract. It was a quiet revolution, led by someone who refused to be overlooked. Later that afternoon, Imani found herself standing outside Nathaniel Brooks's spacious corner office. The city skyline stretched behind the glass walls, a world so vast and indifferent. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked lightly. "Come in." Nathaniel's deep voice invited her. Inside, the room was bathed in soft natural light. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes and framed degrees. Nathaniel sat behind a massive oak desk, his expression unreadable but attentive. "Imani," he began, gesturing to a chair across from him. You handled yourself well today. She nodded, settling into the seat. Thank you, sir. I just did what I had to do. Nathaniel leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Tell me, how did you spot that clause? You must have studied that contract meticulously. Amani glanced down, hands folded on her lap. I have a background in contract law. I've worked late nights reading through documents before. But honestly, it's not about hours put in. It's about knowing what to look for. Nathaniel's gaze softened. You've been with Caldwell and Royce for how long? Just under 2 years, she replied. Most days I'm invisible. I do the work, but I'm rarely part of the conversations. Why do you think that is? Amani took a breath. I'm one of the few black professionals here, and the youngest on the legal team. There's an unspoken assumption I'm here for diversity, not capability. It's exhausting to constantly prove yourself. Nathaniel nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I'm sorry you felt that way. It's not how I want this firm to operate. She looked up, surprised. Then why hasn't it changed? Change is slow, but it starts with moments like today. You made a difference not because of your identity, but because of your skill. That's what matters most. Amani smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of hope. I want to be recognized for my work, not just my presence. Nathaniel stood and walked over to his desk. He pulled out a folder and slid it across to her. I want you to join the internal legal audit team permanently. It's a critical role, and I believe you're ready. Amani opened the folder, her heart pounding. This offer was more than a job, it was validation. Nathaniel added quietly, there's also a fast-track leadership program. If you're interested. She met his eyes steadily. I'm interested in earning respect every step of the way. The moment marked a turning point, not just for Amani, but for the culture at Caldwell and Royce. As she left the office, the city outside seemed different. Full of possibility and challenges she was now ready to face head-on. The next morning, the atmosphere at Caldwell and Royce was charged with a cautious energy. Word had spread fast. Amani Fields, the quiet paralegal who rarely drew attention, had stopped a billion-dollar deal from becoming a legal disaster. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones. Curiosity mixed with a hint of admiration, and for some, reluctant respect. Amani arrived early, her mind racing but her demeanor calm. She was no stranger to skepticism or whispers behind her back. But today felt different. Today, she carried the weight of an opportunity that could change everything. Nathaniel Brooks found her near the elevators and motioned her to follow. They walked through the glass corridors to a smaller conference room, away from the usual hustle. The room was minimalist, a stark contrast to the grand boardroom where tension had cracked earlier. Amani, Nathaniel began, folding his hands on the table. What you did yesterday was more than just spotting a legal risk. You challenged the status quo here. Amani listened carefully. She knew where this was headed but wanted to hear it from him. We want you to be part of the legal audit team permanently, he said firmly. It's a role that requires sharp eyes, relentless attention to detail, and the courage to speak up. You've demonstrated all of that. Amani felt a flicker of pride but kept her expression steady. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I appreciate the trust. Nathaniel leaned forward. There's more. We're offering you a place in our fast-track leadership program. It's designed for employees who show exceptional promise and the ability to lead. The weight of the offer settled on her. A fast-track program meant exposure to senior leaders, strategic projects, and career acceleration. It was a rare chance for someone from her background and position, but pride mixed with caution. Imani had learned not to expect handouts or empty promises. I want to be clear, she said slowly, that I'm grateful, but I'm not interested in being a token or a diversity checkbox. I want to earn my place on merit. Nathaniel smiled, a genuine expression. And you will. That's why we're making this offer, to recognize talent, not labels. As they concluded, Imani felt a new kind of determination. This was not the end of her journey, but the beginning of a battle for respect, influence, and recognition. She left the room aware that many eyes would watch her closely. The pressure was immense, but so was her resolve. Walking back through the hallways, the whispers shifted. From doubt to possibility, Imani stepped back into the main office floor of Caldwell and Royce Capital, her footsteps steady and deliberate. The familiar hum of computers, the low murmur of conversations, and the clacking of keyboards surrounded her. But today, something had shifted. The invisible walls she had felt pressing against her for years seemed thinner, just slightly more transparent. She glanced around the room, catching fleeting looks from colleagues, some curious, others surprised, and a few reluctant nods of acknowledgement. No longer was she just the quiet black paralegal tucked away in the corner, the overlooked intern whose opinions were ignored or dismissed. She had earned a voice loud enough to make a roomful of power brokers stop and listen. Imani sat down at her desk, the offer from Nathaniel Brooks still fresh in her mind. Joining the internal legal audit team meant more than just a new title. It was a gateway to influence, to shaping the company's future from the inside. It was an opportunity to protect the firm from costly mistakes, yes, but also to prove that talent could not be ignored or silenced. Her phone buzzed. A message from a junior lawyer thanking her for catching the claws and saving them all from a potential nightmare. Imani smiled quietly, but she knew better than to rest on this small victory. There were still battles ahead. Doubt and prejudice lingered like shadows in the hallways. Celeste Monroe's cold stare had not softened, and Thomas Greer's resentment simmered beneath forced professionalism. But Imani was no longer just surviving their skepticism. She was ready to challenge it at every turn. She reflected on the journey that brought her here. The long nights studying law, the relentless push to be seen as more than her skin color or job title. The weight of expectations, both external and internal, had shaped her into someone who refused to be invisible. Today she had a seat at the table. But more importantly, she had the power to change the conversation. As the city skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, Imani leaned back in her chair, ready to face the future she had fought so hard to claim. This was not the end of her story, but the start of a new chapter, one where she would define her worth not by others' perceptions, but by her own strength and skill. Her voice had broken the silence once. It would do so again,